Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Beyond the Curb, the Key Elements to a Successful Main Street Streetscape. My name is Savannah Blance Maria. I am the Programs Coordinator here at Connecticut Main Street Center. In a moment, I will introduce today's guest speakers, but first, just a few words. Connecticut Main Street Center is the expert resource for developing and sustaining vibrant downtowns and main streets that fuel our state's prosperity. We are grateful to our sponsors and funding partners that make this work possible. Connecticut Main Street Center's founding sponsors are Eversource and the State of Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. Additional funding comes from Bank, Travelers, and Liberty Bank. We all know a great downtown when we're in it. It's a feeling and energy that we can sense, see, and experience, but it can be hard to articulate what exactly makes a main street great. So we've broken it down into 6 qualities that make it easier to grasp. There is always dedicated Main Street management. The Main Street is connected by multiple modes of transportation for people to access. It's welcoming, friendly, and inclusive. Sustainable practices are in place that bring life and vibrancy for today and for the future. Small businesses are supported and encouraged, as well as residential and commercial development. And there is a unique sense of place. And with that, I am excited to introduce our guest speakers for today's presentation, Paige Bronk, Planning Section Manager and Strategic Growth Lead at M&J Engineering, Lynn DiGiovanni, Municipal Project Liaison and Business Development Manager, also joining us from M&J Engineering, and Thomas Tavella, Founder and Lead Principal of Tavella Design Group. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Lynn.
Sure. Perfect. Welcome, everyone. I have to say, we're really excited to be here. Today's topic is exciting to all of us. And I think, as Savannah pointed out, we've all experienced great main streets, great streetscapes, and we're here to hopefully impart some of our insight and experience and maybe help you get there too, or at least solve some of the challenges that you have in front of you. Today's topic was hard to pare down. There were so many different directions we could have taken this topic in, so many different spin-off topics. What we're going to do today is hopefully allow you to walk away with some insights, some light bulb moments, and maybe some opportunities of initiatives that you can get rolling or help you kind of flesh out some of the thoughts that you had. I think while the presentation is great and our discussion is great, we really look forward to the questions and answer period, and hopefully we'll have plenty of time for that, because that's really where the issues that are most important to you come to light. Next slide. Okay, so as Savannah introduced us in light of our technical areas, I want to kind of shorten it to say that we have a panel of experts here with you today. Paige and Tom have an alphabet soup of accreditations, in addition to years of experience in their respective fields. Me, I will tell you, I'm not an expert in anything, but I've had a variety of experiences to inform my perspective. I spent time in municipal government. I am now with an engineering firm. And we had a small business in the family. And it was a Main Street business. So I understand the workings and mechanisms that lead to success and also present challenges. And like all of us, I've also experienced some really great downtowns and main streets and some that certainly could use a little polishing. So hopefully we'll help you along your way today. Next slide. So I have to say, how did we land on this topic? Well, I'm a mom of 4 boys who loves reading picture books, and I still do. And today's webinar was inspired by a book I read to my boys many years ago, A Street Through Time by Anne Millard. the story stuck with me, and I frequently thought about it, especially in my role, both on the municipal side and also in my professional role at the engineering firm that I am at. I'm not an engineer, but I try to understand as much engineering as I can. Next slide. So the book chronicles the evolution of a street through time. As you turn the pages, it's obvious that the physical development of the street and the surrounding areas grows and responds directly to people who live, work, and play there. It's also obvious that a lot of the systems and the structures that grow out of these evolving streetscapes are necessary to serve the needs of the people who live, work, and play there. And what are these systems? What are these structures? It's really infrastructure at its heart. Next slide. So what is infrastructure? It's kind of I think a big formal word. And I even notice a lot of confusion on what it is. A lot of people think it's the hardscape, it's the buildings, it's the pipes, it's the guardrails, it's those kinds of things, it's the bollards. But really, infrastructure is also the systems. It's the network of sidewalks and roadways and all of the things within a community that makes it go, that enables it to move along and to hum along. It responds to the safety needs. It responds to the basic needs of well-being for water and energy and sidewalks so people can walk and ride bikes and strollers can move along. And it really is a complete ecosystem in itself of both static structures and things that move. And that forms the foundation of our streetscapes. Next slide. So building things is important. Those structures, those systems, they're important, they're essential. They're the building blocks of our main streets. How you build them is even more important. How you the face that you give them. And success really lies in the crosshairs of form and function. The function is essential. But the form is where I think the magic happens. And what are the elements of success to marry these two things? First of all, you need to acknowledge where you're at. What are the existing conditions? You need to understand your physical site. You need to understand your community demographics. You also need to appreciate that there are certain local rules and regulations that you need to stay within the boundaries of. And I think it comes as no surprise, but there are lots of stakeholder interests. There are sometimes supporting interests, and there's sometimes competing interests. And the best designs do a good job of marrying all of those. The heart of it is safety. The spaces we need to create need to be safe. They need to be safe for people walking. They need to be safe for people riding bikes. They need to be safe for people driving cars. And they also need to be inclusive. They need to be functional spaces for anyone of any means that wants to move around, for them to feel comfortable and safe. And then it also comes down at the end of the day is these designs, these places, you need to be able to pay to build them. It's about securing funding. And it's also about managing timelines to make sure that things get built within the time frame you have. And even through construction, it's responding to public sentiment. These are public spaces built with public dollars. People have an interest. These are people's backyards. And it's really important to acknowledge that and be respectful of that. And I think one of the things that we need to understand is that patience and tenacity are required. Anybody who is operating in the public realm understand things don't happen quick enough, but you can begin to lay the building blocks of those changes and build momentum on that. And how can this success be achieved in the designs we're trying to achieve? It's intentional design. You set out and you make deliberate decisions on all of the elements of the design. It's inclusive community engagement. There are substantial opportunity for roadblocks if you do not engage your community. And I know both Paige and Tom will talk a little bit about this. It's about thoughtful planning. And I do just want to interject that some of the goals you have may be great. So that thoughtful planning can involve implementation on a phased-in approach. I think that that's something to keep in the back of your mind, and that could be part of your thoughtful planning process. And I don't want to fail to mention that it's quality construction. The best designs are only as good as how well they're constructed. It's about quality materials. It's about making sure the materials are applied properly, that you're choosing enduring materials, because you're investing a lot of money into these streetscapes and you want to make sure that they look as good today or tomorrow as they do today. Next slide. So very shortly, I'm going to turn it over to our experts. And why Paige, who's a planner, and why Tom, who's a landscape architect? Well, it's the planner who defines the vision for the spaces that we want to create. And it's the landscape architect who shapes the visual identity of those spaces. And the engineers, they're there too. Their goal is to ensure the functionality and feasibility of the spaces we create. Their goal, their job is to make sure that everything is done in a way that is enduring, that is functional, and also that meets your budgets and otherwise. So those things are really important. They all need to work together. So I will now turn it over to Paige, who can talk about the planning side of things.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well. As Lynn and Savannah mentioned, my name is Paige Bronk. I have about 30 plus years of experience in community planning, as well as development, inspections, mainly in the New England area. Grew up in Massachusetts, but I've done a lot of work in Rhode Island and Connecticut. Have also lived and worked in Savannah, Georgia, and Frankfort, Kentucky. So I can tell you through my experiences, everyone wants the same. They want great communities and they want to improve them. I have to admit, when Lynn asked if we would do this presentation in blending planning, landscape architect, and engineers, it kind of reminded me of a joke. What do you get when you blend those all together? Well, we decided we're going to figure it out, and you're going to see a great overlap and a common theme through our presentation. So just jumping right in, focusing on vision alignment. Basically, a Main Street, what you're dealing with is somewhat of a back to the future. I believe everyone's seen that movie, but really, you want to resurrect the best characteristics of past central business districts. And to some degree, we may have strayed from what were successes many decades ago to where we're at today. Automobiles did not always dominate our streets, our communities. Historically, streets were shared by many users. So that's an idea that I believe we're trying to get back to. They were places to be. It was where everyone met, where they gathered, played, shopped. It was the hub of transportation. It was the 1980s mall of their day. There's an image of downtown Mystic, which is somewhat quintessential New England. I think that is somewhat indicative of our history and to some degree, what maybe we're trying to get back to. So how does a vision start? It's not complicated. It really begins simply with an idea, an epiphany, a light bulb. And there are typically a few people that come up with that idea, and it tends to spread from there. The best visions are contagious, and they capture the organic interest of multiple groups. Obviously, people have ideas all the time. Most of them don't necessarily get traction. So there could be several catalysts for a successful idea that jumpstart a streetscape vision. It could be that people are interested in reinvigorating a business district, maybe narrow a wide road. Maybe there's a need for increased pedestrian safety. Maybe people want to widen sidewalks, and that would be in conjunction with narrowing the automobile lanes. Maybe people want sidewalk cafes. There could be a transportation or economic development grant opportunity that's somewhat seed money that plants an idea for people to jumpstart it. or it could be something totally anticipated like COVID-19, a pandemic that is dropped upon society, and we're having to react and trying to get people outside, and how do we keep our businesses going, possibly having outdoor dining, sidewalk cafes. Another way it might start is through a municipal capital improvement program where staff and the community is asked to come up with different projects, and they're floated to town and city councils. Um, Sometimes it is known in certain states that if municipalities pay for the initial planning and design work, take it to, let's say, a 30% level, that their state will step in and pay for part, if not all, of future construction. So that's certainly an incentive for some communities to jumpstart a project. In terms of who would do this, often it's the community. They might be individuals, activists, planners, business people, nonprofits that begin that vision. And the goal, of course, at least from a planning standpoint, is to bring all those people together with similar, but sometimes competing interests and try to get some traction and move the community in a certain direction. Now, the importance of community involvement, it's critical. It's not important, it's critical. Oftentimes there's a committee that would be involved. So once you have the individual idea, it's important to embrace and start bringing people in. And there might be a core group, could be 10, 20 people that meet on a regular basis and talk about things. There might be a need for some survey work. Start to solicit some input from the community and find out what their preferences are. Critical to have open door conversations. It is a mistake to say we're only going to have 3 meetings or to set a formal system. Really want to be open. If you bump into someone, you're out shopping and they want to talk to you about the project, it is really important to meet them on their turf. Buy-in directly relates to the number of people that are involved and your willingness to entertain the feedback. Shortcuts definitely do not work long term, but it's human nature. People want to know, if I only do this, then I can get that. Well, often that's not really reality. You'll hear people say, well, I know this person on the council and we're in good keeping with the current council. Well, that's a short-term cycle. So simply convincing current elected officials will not necessarily win the day in terms of succeeding with a long-range project such as a streetscape project. Now, there are a number of diverse and sometimes competing stakeholders. It is critical to face that straight on and not to resist. There will be differences of opinion. Embrace those. Try to develop consensus. For example, some businesses may say, well, I like the idea of dealing with a streetscape project, but I will resist it if you take any parking away, on-street parking away from the street. This is right out of the gate. It's important to actually understand what their priorities are as you move forward. The other recommendation is avoid a predetermined concept or design. Again, it's human nature. People want to know, hey, I have this idea. This is the solution for the future. If we can only convince the rest of the community, we're golden. We're all set. It's important to allow the process to unfold. It will evolve. It will change. It will involve numerous scenarios, ideas, and designs. So avoid that desire to share your brilliant idea with the world and hope that they're going to come on board. That's a closed system approach that won't necessarily work. Consider numerous scenarios moving forward, even the no change option, and work through a process of elimination. You may have 30 scenarios and start picking them off and get down to a select few from which you can work into final designs. Next slide, please. Now, zoning and regulations. Zoning is important. It is definitely not perfect. It has its pros, it has its cons. It is a tool that was created in the early 1900s. It's basically been somewhat of a crude tool, to be perfectly honest. It was initially created to protect public health, safety, and welfare. So I'll give you an example. Let's say there were residential homes next to a dirty factory in parts of the United States. So you had homes next to maybe a meat processing plant. Zoning was created to have basic standards to protect human public safety and health. These zoning and land regulations, they've of course been improved, they've been modified over time. They impact both public and sometimes private and sometimes public property. Depends on what state you're in and what locality. Some municipalities exempt their own property from zoning. Others will apply their zoning standards to municipal properties. Regulations govern land uses by location, building size, dimensions, driveways, roadways, and much more. And that's basically how some of our roadways, certainly modern roadways, have been built and designed. There's a photo that indicates basically a contemporary roadway. You notice how wide it is, and that certainly does not have a historic feel. Next to that is a photo that basically focuses on what a historic roadway would look like. So in modern times, automobiles have been allowed to dominate the function, design, and ultimately these regulatory standards. Most roadways were designed to maximize speed, flow, parking, etc. This trend is still fairly common today, without regard to market changes, economic needs, housing, or desired new street specifications. However, the automobile domination trend is starting to reverse, particularly in downtowns, where people are again becoming the priority. Roads are now becoming more multi-purpose, and zoning regulations are becoming relaxed and flexible to enable better human scale designs. You'll see some of this with some road diets and also reduction or elimination entirely of parking space standards, particularly in large cities. So, important lesson, zoning is not intended to be static. However, it's become that way, particularly in New England. It should be flexible. It should grow with the times. It's important to modify these zoning regulations to anticipate future changes. One example I can think of is the growing need for outdoor dining. And many of these restaurants are interested in basically having a front facade that opens up onto sidewalks. Sometimes there are sliding doorways. It's certainly not something that was done historically. We need to use these more contemporary market-based and business-based ideas and incorporate them into our zoning. Another example would be dedicated motorcycle and scooter parking on street. For years, the only parking on street was for cars. Well, in some communities, they'll divvy up those automobile spaces, and they will be narrow motorcycle spaces or scooter spaces alone. It's those types of modifications. Important to balance the new development with preservation of your assets. Includes cultural and historic assets. Basically want to lead with your local assets. They'll be your anchor. Often your New England downtowns are rich with these resources. They dominate the corridor. So it's critical to first understand what your strengths are. Redesign your streets with these anchors in mind. You might have a former state house, a former colony house, place of worship, cultural centers, parks. They're the foundation of your vision and your design. In addition, your new streetscape design should distinguish the new from these historic. So complementary new market designs should be embraced in a way that do not compromise your historic and cultural resources. They stand out, but they become integrated. Next slide, please. So in terms of future growth and development, it's important to anticipate your future growth. That doesn't simply mean population and what's the size of the community, but it means the change within your demographics. It could be that you anticipate there's going to be an increase in a younger population. They clearly have different market desires and living patterns than, let's say, boomers. Also housing type, that's often driven by that demographic change as well. You have market-based changes. And you also have evolving transportation changes. Multifamily housing is increasing. There's a desire for more coffee shops, outdoor restaurant use, trolleys, scooters, bikes, pedestrians, all of that's changing. It's important to embrace that within your vision and also future designs. Accessibility for all, critical. Younger people, older people, disabled, multiple users. I want to put a little plug in for AARP. Years ago, they were one of the largest proponents of complete streets. They were going around the country and advocating because they knew that their clients basically they were not benefiting as much from the design of the current roadways. So they wanted to make sure things were pedestrian friendly, crosswalks were safe, and that signage was done appropriately. Accessibility also can deal with vehicle lane narrowing to calm traffic, pedestrian friendly crossings with bump outs, bollards, proper wayfinding signage, which should be done to pedestrian scale and vehicular scale. Flexible design for future development and needs. One never knows, but allow for those future options. Don't become so rigid. Allow for that flexibility because it's going to happen. Mistakes made in the past in allowing one user, that being the automobile, dominate all design and functionality within a roadway. We should learn from that. Bicycle use is expanding rapidly, even pedicabs in some communities. Who would have thought that? Pedicabs are now a growing trend in some municipalities. So there's an option. Are you going to say, we've never dealt with that before? Or, hey, this is an interesting idea. Maybe we need to find a home for them on our street because they're a part of alternative transportation. Lastly, I would say public sentiment. We talked about initial ideas and allowing these ideas and your vision to evolve. Guaranteed all through this process, through a final design, there will be the need for getting public input. Balance those full community desires. You want the input from the community, and it will evolve. There will be things that come about that are unanticipated. One example I can think of in a project I worked on, we had an older population that said, listen, we're really concerned about stormwater pollution that enters our harbor and our bay, and we will resist you on this great project unless you address first flush stormwater. You will include rain gardens in that project. Otherwise, you'll never get your project done. And we're prepared to go to the federal level and allege that you violate clean water action laws. So obviously, you will find today that project does indeed include rain gardens and our ability to bring everyone together and get that project done. At this point, I will turn it over to Tom to discuss some landscape architect design components. Thank you.
Thanks, Paige. Yeah, I want to get into really the more physical elements of a streetscape. And some of the most important things you can do is really create a sense of place for your downtown and your streetscape. Identify those historic areas like Paige said, or unique characters of a community, and bring them out to the light so you don't look like the town just next door to you. So we really like to set the pace with creating a sense of place in all of our designs. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about the anatomy of the street. I'm going to start on the right-hand side is the travel way. Back in the day, travel ways were always very wide, at least 12 feet. We're seeing communities now dropping them down to 10, which also helps with our transition zone. That zone where the bike is, you can either do parking, you can do bike facilities, or even out parklets for outdoor cafes and things. Next to that is the amenity zone, which I also like to call the buffer zone, because that zone makes you feel protected from the cars driving in the street next to you. This is where your street lights, your waste receptacles are, sculpture, plantings, all these different things that really can make the street sing a little bit more. And then you have the pedestrian zone there. That's where people are moving back and forth. I typically like to keep about an 8 foot wide stretch in there, so two couples can pass without bumping into each other, if it's possible. And then you have the opportunity zones, and this can range from outdoor cafes down to little one seat right next to the window type of situations. And again, you can put artwork and planters and things like that to keep things interesting. People lose interest very quickly. They have about a 5 second a time span. So if you have a blank wall, people aren't going to be using that street. So you really want to dress it up a bit. And then you have the building. And when we do these streetscapes, we go from building facade to building facade and see how we can work the street and the sidewalks to make a better place. Next slide. Some of the things that we incorporate into a street, as Paige said, we're seeing more and more rain gardens out in the street. The ones that you see on the left here, the shop owners originally came out and said, well, who's going to take care of those? We're not taking care of them. And we were talking with the city, and the city was going to take care of it. And then over time, we also noticed that all the store owners are out there cleaning and putting in their own plants into our rain gardens, and they really took ownership of it. Other things that we look into are safety for the pedestrians as they do cross the streets. Rapid flashing beacons, raised crosswalks, all different ways to incorporate those into a streetscape. And of course, the different types of furnishings that are out there that really can set the tone and the character of your downtown. Next slide. So we look at the full width of a street, how it functions before and after, and what we want in there. We can have the 2 rows of cars traveling down the lane, or we can narrow those up. We can do share rows to get bikes on there, or we can give them dedicated bike lanes. Then you have your furniture zone and your sidewalks and how to buffer against parking against this thing. So you really want to look at that full cross section of a street when you are looking at your downtown. Next slide. Some of the safety features, the intersections, improving the visibility, expanding the bump outs into the street so pedestrians can get out into it and look down the street before crossing and have a shorter crossing area. The management of speed through speed humps. Some people love them, some people hate them. The important thing is, if you're going to design those, make sure they're designed properly. So when you go to plow the snow, you're not destroying the plow or the speed hump itself. And of course, the different ways you can incorporate bikes into it. More and more people want to go down to your downtown, but they don't want to drive their car. They want to either walk, jump on a bike or a scooter and get down there. So it's really critical to a vibrant downtown to have multimodal access to the town center. Next slide. Here's a couple of opportunity spaces that I'd like to talk about. Always look for opportunities. Sometimes it's an alley that's not being used, and you could set up cafes in there, or you can do some artwork, or it could be outdoor foosball or sporting events or something like that. So just think about the different spaces in your downtown and take advantage of them. The upper left-hand corner, this is in Norfolk, Connecticut. When we did that project, people were complaining about not having enough parking, and the first selectman said to me, you can have 5 parking spaces, Tom. And so I said, okay. So I used those 5 parking spaces, created this little pocket park, and I also redesigned the entire parking area of the downtown. And this lady came up to me after it was built, and she started shaking her finger at me saying, you're the guy who did this. And I thought she was going to kill me. And she said, I can't believe how much parking we have here, and we have this beautiful parklet. And I was like, oh, thank God. And so just by reorganizing things, you can really change the scape itself. The lower left is a parklet we did down in Louisiana and New Orleans for a demonstration project for the American Society of Landscape Architects. And at the end of this, the owner of the restaurant came up to me and said, I want to keep this forever. And I said, well, you have to talk to your parking district on that and make a deal with them. And then I was down there a few years ago, and that parklet is still being used. So, and this parklet was built in 2015 before COVID and all that, when they became popular. So different ways of capturing space for your downtowns. This one on the right is I Street in Washington. This is the headquarters of the American Society of Landscape Architects. And when I was president, they asked me to do a streetscape design for out in front. And the idea was to develop some designs to incorporate complete streets, different bike facilities, green infrastructure, and also a place for people to sit and learn about landscape architecture right out on the site. So those types of opportunities that you can find in every community, you got to take advantage of them and work with your planners and your engineers to figure it out and make it sure it can work in your community. Next slide. I'm going to turn this over to Lynn to finish up.
Yep. Thank you. Well, it was purposeful to put engineering following planning and landscape architecture. And you can see, in something I say very often, landscape architecture is not about bushes and benches. As you can see, Tom's Field brings a lot of other insight and expertise into the designs that he does. And I think it's really important, because the concepts that are developed at that level really need to work on an engineering side of things. So there needs to be an understanding of engineering principles. So we've talked about it before, the functionality, safety, it's essential. The engineer's job at the end of this process is really to make what has been designed work, to bring that vision to life. To find a way to enable all of these systems and structures to coexist. And it's sometimes a challenge, especially in our older areas where you open up the road and there are lots of surprises. I will tell you that probably there are situations that have been encountered that there are solutions that exist for, and people look at it and go, how are we going to do this? And that's where the engineering comes in. So I can't emphasize that enough. What I want to also talk about is that these spaces need to work for everyone, be safe, they need to last. And I think both Paige and Tom did a good job of speaking about that. So yes, it's essential that these spaces function, but you don't need to compromise form. And I think that that was a message that was given by both of them. The form is where the magic happens. It's critical to creating unique places that people want to be. That form is also a place where you can build in things that bring safety and bring a environment that is vibrant. It's those aesthetic enhancements that are what attract and retain businesses, that make it resident friendly, that celebrate the uniqueness of the town. And I think that it is important to know, and all of those things can be done within the rules and regulations, but you first need to understand what your boundaries are to work within. Particularly if you're working along state roads, you need to understand what your limitations are and work with them. Next slide. So finally, we'll conclude, and we're excited for the question and answer period. I think what we hope to leave you with today is an inspiration to think beyond the essential. We understand infrastructure is essential, but there are ways that you can go about it to make your spaces unique, to make them vibrant, to make them great. And folding in your community, engaging the community early and often, and building on that vision, designing for people first, prioritizing accessibility, mobility, gathering spaces. It really points to balancing the aesthetics with functionality. And also, I know Paige talked about it, as did Tom too, we've realized that we've along the way have an opportunity to create spaces that can transition and move and adapt as a community involves. It doesn't mean to redo a complete streetscape. It may be a matter of making some changes to enable the vision that exists. So we will move to the question and answer period.
Thank you to all of our speakers. That was great. And we do already have a few questions coming in. The first one is, can you use the transition zone for both a bike lane and parking, or are you required to choose one or the other?
Tom, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Well, it all depends on how much space you have in that transition zone. If you're gonna have parking, it's gonna be a minimum of 9 feet wide. And for a bike lane, you really need about 5 feet. So when you start looking at your cross section from facade to facade and the roadway, that's where you can start figuring out, can you fit them both, or you're gonna have to take one or the other. If you do just parking, then maybe you put sharrows on that street, so you still have the bike facility, but the cyclists will be in the road with the cars. But it's a good study to do with your transportation engineer and your civils to help you out as well.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting a bunch of questions in. So next one, any recommendations or examples of using landscaping to connect parts of the main street that may be disconnected by setbacks or a vacant lot to create more cohesive pedestrian experience and draws people to walk through that disconnection?
I guess you want me to take that one too.
And Paige, chime in if you have anything to offer as well.
When you have negative, what I always call the missing teeth on a streetscape, there's opportunities there, even if it's privately owned and it's just laying fallow. Work with that owner and say, can we plant up that edge, or can we put some benches in there until you are ready to develop that property? Anything to kind of break up that openness so it doesn't feel like there's a lost tooth in your mouth. So that's how I'd approach those gaps in your streetscape.
Sounds like they could be considered also some of those opportunity zones that you talked about.
Absolutely.
Next question. How do you effectively navigate efforts for road dieting and traffic calming features through the state DOT?
Yeah, and I can just jump in and then I'll turn it over to the other two. I think honestly, they're a stakeholder. So it's engaging in those conversations very early on a conceptual level. And then it's also really understanding what you can and cannot do and just working within that framework. You know, I will tell you that the state puts a tremendous amount of emphasis on economic development, understands how these things interact, but it's in a new place. That's not where things started. I think we talked a lot about the world in our neighborhoods being created for cars. There is an increased awareness and opportunity to shift that. CONDOT is attentive. There are certainly conversations that could be had, and I would encourage early conversations to involve CONDOT to get the ball rolling and find out what your limitations are or where your opportunities may be. So I think it starts with a conversation. Tom and Paige, I don't know if you have anything else to offer.
Yeah.
Couple thoughts. Basically, I don't know that people realize often there are legal agreements between your state DOT and the municipality. So the municipality is given some rights and actually an expectation that they'll do some level of maintenance. So it's not like if there's a state roadway in your municipality that the town or the city, you know, they don't do anything. They do get involved. So if there is an idea that is embraced by your municipality, approaching the DOT from the municipal level likely will get some traction. The other idea I had, there are examples in the state. I referenced Mystic before. There was a pretty extensive streetscape project in downtown Mystic. That is all, for the most part, state right of way. So clearly, there are examples like that where the municipality has worked closely with the state to successfully design and implement a new streetscape project.
I'd just like to add, when I started doing streetscapes so many years ago, it was tough with the DOT. They had their set ways. They were all about car movement, and that's about it. Going up to now and in the recent past, DOT has been much more open to complete streets and bike facilities and the different amenities. So I think you'll see with the state DOT, they're much more willing to work with the community now than they used to. They used to just say, if you want to do that, you can do it, but you have to take care of all the maintenance. We want nothing to do with that road anymore. Nowadays, they'll work with you.
So all of that ties into the next question, which you all have touched on just a bit, but maybe you could get a little bit more specific. Any advice for getting DOT on board with state roads that run through downtown, traffic calming and sidewalks, getting them on board with traffic calming and sidewalk setbacks, etc.?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. And again, I think it begins with a dialogue. I also think we need to go back to the two words that we dropped earlier. It's about, patience and I guess tenacity, perseverance. I do believe with the types of grants that are being made available also, that shows you if the state is willing to put funding down, that there is an initiative. And I do believe that we're in a new place. I think the state recognizes that creating these places is not only good for these individual cities and towns, but it's also beneficial to the state as a whole. So I would certainly, again, engage in the conversations early. I think it gives you an opportunity to discuss where the areas of conflict are. And I think, working with a team that comes to the table with different perspectives can help you perhaps engage in a conversation that may not get you where everything you want, but it may move the needle. So I don't know if that's helpful, but all I can say is just be persistent and have informed conversations. And I also think what's beneficial, I will say, is that showing that you have community support for any idea. What maybe it's your local traffic authority, maybe it's others in town, maybe it's a big employer. Showing support for things. There are certain limitations for safety reasons. The state cannot move on, but I think they would be attentive. It's just having the right conversation.
Also, Lynn, I think coming forward in a comprehensive, well-planned, designed proposal, I don't think DOT really appreciates the one-offs where there's a situation at this particular curb and we want it fixed. Can you get done by next week? They're not going to react to that so well. They're more interested, if you're serious about traffic calming and sidewalk setbacks, coming forward with a real concept that shows a coordinated way to handle that, I think is often better received.
I think that's great advice from both of you, especially what you just commented on, Paige, showing that you've organized your thoughts and you're serious about working with the DOT. That's great. Another question that we have is, with limited budget, what streetscape improvements give the biggest ROI for improving the pedestrian experience and traffic calming?
I'll let Paige and Tom speak to that.
Oh, wow. With limited budgets, you really have to be careful about moving curb lines because you affect utilities. Once you start affecting utilities, that's where the price starts going sky high. So working within your own framework and putting in the furnishings and plantings and really upgrade your pavements really start to bring a sense of place to an existing sidewalk without really having to get into the heavy lifting of utility moving and things like that. So that's where I would go with it.
I think in terms, Tom would know more about costs, but I think in terms of priority, and you kind of have low tier, medium, and high tier costs. And I've always been a believer trying to work with low hanging fruit. So if you know that the budget is limited, you just want to kind of jumpstart, try to find out what the community would like and match that with your budget. You know, maybe the bump outs could be done without impacting utility and curb lines. Maybe signage is really the need. So there could be some things that are not big ticket items that would make an immediate high profile splash. That would be my comment.
Yeah, and just piggybacking on what Paige said, I know there are all alternatives. You need to look at exactly what are you trying to accomplish and look at some less expensive alternatives. What I would also say, I spent time in a distressed municipality. Money was always an issue. And I think one of the greatest things you can do is set out to plan the space that you want, and then find a way to implement those things incrementally so that you're constantly moving forward and you're not compromising the overall vision. Because if you start piecemealing things, sometimes it's not cohesive. So if you can create an overall design, a vision for that space, and then begin to pick off some of the more easily implementable or less expensive options, then you do that. Maybe to Paige's point is maybe you can't do the bump out, but maybe you know, do different treatments along the roadway. I've seen where they've done special painting, and Tom, you can talk about that, where there are less expensive alternatives to achieve what you want in the interim, working toward that main goal. I would also say, when you have community involvement, some of the things that we talk about, it may be an opportunity to get some of the organizations involved in your cities and towns to maybe perhaps support and sponsor some of these things. Get your garden club involved to be able to do some plantings or things like that. I feel most comfortable when you're working from a main plan and you start to pick off pieces in an implementation phased way of going about it.
Thank you. Some of what you just touched upon, Lynn, ties into our next question. What does effective community engagement look like? For example, if you'd like to fill a space or wall with art, how do you go about reaching out to artists or community members?
Go ahead, Paige.
I can start with that. Before I give a direct answer, I want to piggyback on where Lynn ended up. As a planner, I guess I'm biased. I like to see strategically a larger perspective with lots of components over a corridor, with different options and how they all come together. Because the best intent on one specific item sometimes has unintended consequences when you think that you want to do the right thing. So I'll delve into the detail. Well, you want to do a wall with art that will be happy, that'll please some people that may not please other people. Whereas if you have the full plan and that's one component, you have some basis from which you understand this is something that people want. I think that provides a more compelling discussion. I think specific to community engagement, there are a lot of ways to do it. Clearly, I'm still a favorite of face-to-face, in-person conversations. You just pick up on body language and you get your messaging. And I just think, given the age of our population and a lot of New England communities, people work that way as well. But there are other ways to do it. I briefly mentioned surveys. You know, you could do Survey Monkey. That's pretty easy to do. There are municipal software programs now. Company, this is no pitch, but Granicus, which is a big municipal software company that a lot of municipalities have. They will do community engagement tools, and you can build like Greater Groton in Groton, Connecticut has one, and they'll build certain initiatives and they'll put them up there. There might be 20 different items, and they'll talk about the idea. They'll solicit input, and it's not a closed, it's ongoing for weeks. When you think of like a newspaper online, you have like that chat comment on the bottom. It's kind of like that format, but it's owned and controlled by the municipalities so they can properly ask questions and get the input and get more buy-in. I think maybe a combination between the in-person and that digital solicitation is probably the answer.
And I'm going to jump in too, and I will tell you that I think the greatest success is when you have a smaller scale dialogue with community members. It's determining who the most vocal community members are, and making sure that you're hitting all of the points of contact. And I will say, not to overlook especially when you're doing streetscape design work and other things, you need to make sure you're even folding in your emergency service personnel and understanding their needs. So I think it's really about engaging in smaller, more intimate conversations, meeting people where they're at. I say that because those people are most likely intimidated to speak in a larger room. Their voices get drowned out. And very often the larger room begins to take on its own momentum and some very valid things get lost. Going into a senior center, meeting at a library, engaging school children, we've been involved in that, having contests or otherwise to really make it a community space built and designed by the community is really important because it enables you to get through some of those processes and procedures much easier. And it's a source of some really brilliant ideas.
My favorite is a multi-day design workshop or design charrette, and it's got to be at least 3 days long. And the longer you can stay in a community, I traveled the country doing this, and the people that come up to you after the fact or the next morning when you're having breakfast and they know that you're staying at that hotel, they come up to you and say, this is what I wanted to say, but I couldn't say it. And also breaking people out into groups so they can take a piece of paper and a pen and draw right along with you. And they're seeing the design come to life right in front of their eyes. By the last day, they realized they were the ones that helped shape that design. And that's the way to go in my book.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Do you have any closing remarks or words for our viewers today?
I'll just jump in and say thank you. It was really fun for us to do this. The talking about the ideas and thinking about things, just conversation among ourselves, brings a lot of thoughts to mind. And we are happy to help however we can as you're wading through. I'm happy to share contact information and, reach out. And I'm very good about thinking out loud about things, had a lot of experience in many different ways. And I enjoy the challenge of trying to sometimes figure out the problems.
Yeah, and just to answer Carl Rose's question about street trees, actually UI has a great reference, a poster of trees that do really well in streetscapes, especially for salts and things like that. But also most of your nursery catalogs have a section that have salt tolerant species, good streetscape plants and things like that. So there's a lot of resources out there that you can find. So that's my final comment.
Thank
I also
you.
wanted to say thank you. This was enjoyable. Yesterday, a few of us were at a presentation from Dan O'Keefe, the Connecticut DECD Commissioner and Innovation Officer. And he surprised me with a comment, and it really resonated with me. He said, sometimes he's learned that it's important to take a step back, or at least a pause, and mistakes are made by moving forward too quickly. There's that saying, haste makes waste. And as a planner, I like to plan. I like to be strategic. And I think that is important for a project like Streetscape. You don't want to jump in without understanding the broader comprehensive picture, because it's not about one element. It's not about one little thing. It's about a long-term project to transform the corridor that touches on a variety of aspects, and you want to get it right. So sometimes it's okay to go at your pace. It's important to just get it right.
Thank you, Paige. We sincerely appreciate your perspective today as a planner and all of the perspectives offered today. Thank you again to all of you for agreeing to present with us today. If it's okay now, I'll move on to make a few closing remarks and then we'll end. We invite you to join the more than 80 communities around the state committed to improving their Main Street by becoming a member of Connecticut Main Street Center. As a member, you receive exclusive help and resources to support your downtown work. Please visit connecticutmainstreet.org to learn more. Registration is now open for our brand new event, State of Maine, happening on June 18th at the Mattituck Museum in Waterbury. You can register now at ctmainstreet.org/events. Once again, we thank our sponsors and program partners. When you exit this webinar, you should be prompted to complete an evaluation for this presentation. Please take a moment to share your thoughts, as it helps us shape our programming so it is most valuable to you. That concludes today's webinar. Have a great day. Thank you.